The words landed like a slap in front of 40 strangers. "This bathroom isn't for passengers like you." Dr. Amara Whitfield stood frozen in the narrow aisle, her hand still resting on the folding door, and for one terrible second she thought she'd misheard. She hadn't. Brittany Colson, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, stood with her clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield, and she said it again, slower this time, like she wanted every word to sink in. "If you've ever been looked at and judged before a single sentence left your mouth, stay with me, because what happens next on this airplane is going to make your blood boil, and then it's going to make you believe in justice again." Meridian Skyways Flight 462 had left Denver 2 hours earlier, climbing east over the Rockies toward Charlotte, North Carolina. Amara had flown this route more times than she could count. 15 years as a Senior Aviation Safety Consultant for the Federal Aviation Administration meant airports and Kissens were practically her second home. But today was different. Today was supposed to be the beginning of a long overdue vacation. 10 days on the coast with her husband, no laptops, no case files, no red-eye briefings. She'd even worn her softest navy blazer instead of a suit, something that felt like relaxing. Beside her in 14B, Marcus Whitfield adjusted his reading glasses and flipped another page of the contract he swore he wouldn't look at until they landed. 26 years as a corporate litigator had taught him that work followed you everywhere, even at 36,000 feet. He glanced over at his wife and caught the small wince crossing her face. "You good, mi amor?" he asked quietly, the old nickname slipping out the way it always did when he worried. She nodded, but the truth was more complicated. 3 weeks earlier, her rheumatologist had switched her autoimmune medication, and the new one came with a side effect nobody warns you about politely: sudden, urgent pressure that gave almost no notice. She'd read the pamphlet. She'd planned around it at home. She had not planned for turbulence, drink service, and a flight attendant who'd apparently decided, the moment she laid eyes on her, exactly what kind of passenger Amara was. "I'll be right back," she told Marcus, giving his hand a squeeze before rising. She made her way past rows of tired travelers, past the beverage cart, toward the rear lavatory, the one she always preferred over the first-class one near the front. A small habit of not wanting to seem like she was pulling rank. That's when Brittany Colson stepped sideways, blocking the folding door with her body, like a bouncer at a nightclub. "Excuse me," Amara said politely. "I need to use the restroom." "This bathroom isn't for passengers like you," Brittany said, flat, rehearsed, cold. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. A businessman too rose up, lowered his laptop screen. A mother mid-conversation with her toddler went silent. Amara felt the eyes before she even turned to look for them. "I'm sorry." "What?" Amara asked, keeping her voice level. Years of testifying in front of hostile congressional panels had taught her that calm was a weapon sharper than anger. "This lavatory is being held for priority passengers," Brittany said, straightening her spine like she'd just quoted federal law. "You'll need to wait." "Priority passengers," Amara repeated. "And who determines that?" "Cabin class, frequent flyer status, people who've actually earned certain privileges." Brittany's tone had the practiced smoothness of someone who'd said something similar before, more than once, to more than one person. Amara looked past her. No out-of-service sign, no maintenance tag. The little indicator glowed a plain, unbothered green. 2 other passengers had used that same door in the last hour without a word of protest from anyone. "I'm in seat 14A, Amara said. "I'm a paying passenger with the same rights as everyone else on this aircraft." Brittany laughed, short and sharp, the kind of laugh meant to humiliate rather than amuse. "Rights? Sweetheart, this is my cabin. I make the calls up here." That was the moment Marcus appeared at his wife's shoulder, his lawyer instincts fully switched on, the second he noticed her missing for too long. "Is there a problem?" His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of a man who had spent decades cross-examining people who thought they could bluff their way past him. Brittany sized him up. Well-dressed, protective posture, a wedding band that matched his wife's, and recalculated instantly. "No problem at all," she said sweetly. "Just explaining our boarding priority policy to your wife." "What policy is that?" Marcus asked. "I've flown Meridian 11 times this year. I've never heard of a bathroom priority system." Brittany's smile held, but her eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the gathering crowd of onlookers. "It's new," she said. "Corporate rolled it out last month." "Then it should be in the in-flight magazine," said a voice from 2 rows back. Nora Bennett, a high school history teacher from Tucson flying home to Charlotte for a family wedding, had her phone already halfway out of her bag, thumb hovering over the record button. She'd spent 12 years watching bullies operate in hallways, and she recognized the pattern instantly. This wasn't policy. This was a woman enjoying the smallest taste of power she'd ever been handed. "Ma'am, I have a genuine medical condition," Amara said, keeping her composure, even as the pressure in her body intensified with every passing second. "I need 30 seconds. That's all I'm asking." "Medical condition," Brittany repeated, arms folding tighter. "Where's your medical bracelet? Where's your documentation? Everybody claims a medical emergency the second they don't get their way." "I don't need paperwork to use an airplane bathroom," Amara said. "That's not how any of this works." "Don't tell me how my job works," Brittany snapped, color rising in her cheeks. "I've been doing this for 9 years. I know exactly what I'm allowed to enforce." 9 years, Amara thought, filing the number away with the same clinical precision she used when reviewing incident reports back at the agency. 9 years of interactions. 9 years of split-second judgments about who deserved courtesy and who didn't. 9 years, and this was apparently the first time someone had pushed back hard enough to matter. By now, the confrontation had drawn a small audience along both sides of the aisle. Derek Hall, a software engineer from Austin in seat 15C, had stopped pretending to work and was openly watching, his laptop forgotten on the tray table. Isabel Vega, traveling with her 16-year-old daughter Camila to visit family in Charlotte, leaned into the aisle murmuring a rapid translation to Camila in Spanish, her voice already tight with recognition. She'd seen this exact tone before, in different rooms, from different people, and it never got easier to watch. Ma'am, Amara corrected herself, glancing at the name tag. "I'm going to ask you one final time. May I please use the restroom?" Something shifted in Brittany's face, the professional mask slipping for just a heartbeat, and underneath it Amara saw something ugly and small trying to hide. "No," Brittany said, loud enough now for half the cabin to hear clearly. "And if you keep pushing this, I'll write you up for non-compliant passenger behavior." The cruelty of the threat landed like a physical blow. A businessman near the galley actually laughed out loud in disbelief. Marcus's calm finally cracked at the edges. "You're threatening my wife with a fabricated violation because she needs to use the bathroom." "I'm enforcing policy," Brittany said. "File a complaint when we land if you don't like it." "Oh, we will," Amara said quietly. "Just not the kind you're expecting." There was something in her voice that made Brittany pause. Not anger, not a raised octave, just an unshakable, terrifying certainty, like someone reading from a script only she could see. "Are you threatening me?" Brittany demanded. "No," Amara said. "I'm informing you." The distinction sailed straight over Brittany's head, but it didn't sail over the passengers. Nora Bennett kept recording. Derek Hall was already typing notes into his phone. Isabel whispered something urgent to Camila, who nodded and pulled out her own phone. "Remember whatever you want," Brittany said, chin lifted in defiance. "That door stays closed until I say otherwise." That was the moment, Doctor. Amara Whitfield reached into her carry-on and pulled out her phone. The pain had crossed from uncomfortable into something sharper, more urgent, the kind of pressure that made her breath go shallow. She understood the pharmacology behind it better than most patients ever would. She'd read every page of the prescribing information, adjusted her schedule around the drug's unpredictable timing, built her whole day around managing a body that no longer entirely cooperated with her. But you cannot schedule turbulence. You cannot negotiate with a flight delay. And you certainly cannot predict the exact moment a stranger in a uniform decides you don't deserve basic human dignity. "Ma'am, you can't use your phone during flight," Brittany said quickly, grasping for any rule within reach. "Actually, I can," Amara replied evenly. "We're above 10,000 feet. Your own captain announced approved device. Use 20 minutes ago." The precision of the answer told Brittany in an instant that she was dealing with someone who understood the rules of this aircraft far better than she did, and that realization sent a visible chill through her. Diane Foster, the senior flight attendant, arrived just as Amara lifted the phone to her ear. "Brittany, what's going on back here?" "Passengers being difficult," Brittany said, her voice losing its earlier confidence. "I explained the priorities." "What priority policy?" Diane's frown deepened. "We don't restrict lavatory access during normal cruise." "There's no such thing." Derek Hall stood halfway out of his seat, so his 6-foot frame could be seen clearly down the aisle. "I heard the whole thing," he announced. "She told this passenger the bathroom was for, quote, priority passengers, and then threatened to report her for non-compliance when she pushed back." "That's exactly what happened," Isabel Vega confirmed, her daughter nodding beside her, phone still recording. Diane's expression darkened as she realized her junior flight attendant hadn't misspoken once. She'd built an entire fabricated policy on the spot and defended it in front of dozens of witnesses. "Is this true?" Diane asked, voice gone cold. Brittany's mouth opened and closed without sound. She'd expected, if anything, a quiet complaint card filed after landing, buried somewhere in corporate for weeks before anyone even glanced at it. She had not expected a public reckoning at cruising altitude. Amara's call connected. "FAA emergency compliance. This is Agent Whitmore." The voice on the line was crisp, alert, backed by the low hum of a response center that clearly never fully slept. "This is Dr. Amara Whitfield, Aviation Safety Consultant, authorization code 5192, Amara said, loud and clear enough for every nearby passenger and one very pale flight attendant to hear every syllable. "I'm filing a real-time discrimination report aboard Meridian Skyways Flight 462. Currently en route from Denver to Charlotte." The reaction was immediate and total. Brittany's face drained of color, so fast she looked almost translucent. Diane's eyes went wide with recognition of the name. A tray of drinks slipped from Kyle Ramsey's hand, the junior attendant, standing frozen at the edge of the scene, plastic cups scattering across the carpet. It had. "Dr. Whitfield, Agent," Whitmore said instantly. "Please confirm your seat and current situation." "Seat 14A. I'm being denied lavatory access by flight attendant Brittany Colson, who has cited a non-existent priority policy, questioned my medical need without cause, and threatened to file a false report against me when I objected. Copy that." Escalating to flight operations and the civil rights desk now. "Can you confirm aircraft tail number?" Amara glanced through the small oval window at the wing markings, reading them the way she'd read 1,000 incident reports before. N462MS, roughly 90 minutes from Charlotte Douglas. Flight conditions normal, aside from the civil rights violation currently in progress. Brittany made a small, strangled sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and grabbed the seat back in front of her for support. She'd heard stories about calls like this one, whispered in crew lounges like ghost stories, calls that ended careers before the wheels even touched the runway. She had simply never imagined she'd be the subject of one. "Dr. Whitfield," Diane said urgently, stepping closer. "Please, let's resolve this quietly, without accountability?" Amara asked, still holding the phone steady. without making sure this doesn't happen to the next passenger, who doesn't happen to have a federal hotline memorized. Diane had no answer, because there wasn't one that didn't sound like an excuse. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Ortiz was reviewing his approach charts when the emergency line buzzed. In 29 years of flying, he'd learned that calls on that particular line were never good news. Weather, mechanical, security. He had never received one about a civil rights complaint unfolding in real time behind him. Meridian 462, this is FAA emergency operations, priority traffic, the voice on his radio said. First Officer Rachel Simmons leaned in to listen. We've received a discrimination complaint from a passenger with direct reporting authority to this agency. Dr. Amara Whitfield, seat 14A, alleging civil rights violations by a member of your cabin crew. Ortiz felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Dr. Whitfield had consulted on 2 separate incident reviews earlier in his career, her assessments respected enough to shape training standards across the industry. Copy, he said, keeping his voice level despite the alarm rising in his chest. We'll address it immediately. Please be advised, Doctor. Whitfield remains on an open line with our emergency response center. This incident is being logged in real time. Notifications have also gone to Meridian Corporate and the Department of Transportation's Consumer Protection Office. Ortiz closed his eyes for half a second. Real-time monitoring, corporate notification, federal oversight. This was no longer a passenger dispute that could be smoothed over with a drink voucher and an apology. This was a case being built, sentence by sentence, 36,000 feet above Kansas. Senior flight attendant to the cockpit, immediately, he said into the crew phone. Back in the cabin, Diane Foster made her way forward on legs that didn't quite feel steady, passing rows of passengers still buzzing about what they'd just witnessed. Word had already rippled backward through economy. The woman in 14A had called the FAA. Federal agents were involved. Someone's career was ending at cruising altitude. She knocked on the cockpit door and stepped inside, once the lock disengaged. Captain, is this about the situation in row 14? It's about a federal civil rights complaint, Ortiz said. Brittany Colson denied lavatory access to an FAA consultant, invented a policy that doesn't exist, and threatened the passenger with a false report. Dr. Whitfield is currently on an open line with FAA emergency response. Corporate has been notified. DOT is aware. Diane's face went pale. Oh no. Oh yes, Ortiz said grimly. Get her off passenger duty. Now, document everything. This is bigger than one bad interaction. Corporate is going to want a full record of exactly what was said and when. Diane returned to the cabin and found Brittany slumped into an empty seat, shaking, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Brittany, Diane said, her voice gentler than the situation probably warranted, I need your badge and your access card. You're being removed from duty pending investigation. Please, Brittany whispered. I didn't mean. I was just. You were just discriminating against a passenger because of how she looked, Derek Hall said from his seat. Not unkindly, just factually. We all heard it. And recorded it, Nora Bennett added, holding up her phone. Brittany looked around the cabin at faces that had been strangers an hour earlier, now unified in quiet, damning agreement. Fellow crew members were stepping back from her like she carried something contagious. Her career, the one she'd built for 9 years, was dissolving in real time in front of dozens of witnesses, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've received a priority communication and need to make an operational adjustment to our cabin crew assignment. We appreciate your patience. Every passenger who'd witnessed the confrontation understood exactly what that sentence meant. By the time Flight 462 touched down in Charlotte, the story had already outpaced the aircraft. Nora Bennett's video, 13 minutes of raw, unedited footage, had been uploading in the terminal Wi-Fi before the seatbelt sign even switched off. Derek Hall posted a detailed timeline to his professional network before he'd even collected his carry-on from the overhead bin. Isabel Vega called a cousin who worked in local news. By the time Brittany walked off that aircraft, flanked by 2 airport security officers waiting quietly at the jet bridge, Flight 462 was already trending. At Meridian Skyways headquarters in Charlotte, Vice President of Operations, Miriam Ashcroft, was in the middle of a budget meeting when her assistant burst in without knocking. "We have a federal situation on Flight 462, she said, and the room went silent in the particular way. Rooms go silent when someone says the word federal. Within 20 minutes, CEO Gregory Vance was sitting across a conference table from his general counsel and HR director, staring at a laptop screen already showing 3 different video angles of the confrontation. "Explain to me," Vance said, voice tight, "how we ended up with a civil rights investigation happening mid-flight." Dr. Amara Whitfield is an FAA Aviation Safety Consultant with direct reporting authority to multiple federal agencies. General Counsel this time introduced herself as Regina Falk, flipping through the incident brief. When she files a complaint, it doesn't sit in a queue. It gets acted on immediately. "What exactly did our employee do?" Vance asked. "Denied lavatory access based on a policy that does not exist. Made comments implying the restriction was based on passenger type. Threatened a false report when the passenger pushed back." Falk closed the folder. "This isn't a customer service failure. This is textbook discrimination, documented by at least 6 passengers and captured on video from multiple angles." HR Director Elena Cross had already pulled Brittany Colson's full employment file, and what she found made her stomach turn. 3 prior complaints in 5 years, each one alleging some version of the same pattern, questioning a black businessman's right to sit in an upgraded seat, being needlessly hostile to a Latino family traveling with elderly grandparents, doubting an Asian American doctor's credentials during an in-flight medical situation. Every single complaint had been reviewed by the same regional supervisor, a man named Walter Diggs, and every single time, Diggs had classified the incident as a communication misunderstanding and recommended nothing more than additional training. "She should have been terminated years ago," Elena said, sliding the file across the table. "And it looks like her supervisor actively protected her every single time." Vance rubbed his temples. "So, we don't just have one bad employee. We have a manager who's been running interference for discriminatory behavior for half a decade." "That's exactly what we have," Elena confirmed. "And once federal investigators pull these records, they're going to find it in about an hour. They found it in less than that." FAA Inspector Michael Renner was assigned as lead investigator within 90 minutes of Amara's call, and his very first request was for Meridian's complete regional employment and complaint records going back 5 years. What his team found was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern, protected at multiple levels, allowed to continue because addressing it honestly would have been inconvenient. Meanwhile, at a quiet corner table in the Charlotte Airport terminal, Amara sat with Marcus, still speaking periodically with Agent Whitmore, providing additional detail for the federal file. "I need to be clear about something," she told him. "I'm not filing this complaint only as a passenger. I'm filing it as someone who has spent 15 years reviewing airline safety and conduct standards, and what I witnessed today reflects an institutional problem, not a single bad afternoon." "Understood, Dr. Whitfield," Whitmore said. "We're recommending a full compliance audit of Meridian's regional hiring, training, and complaint resolution practices." Within a week, the Department of Transportation had opened a formal review. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was examining a pattern of internal complaint suppression. Congress, sensing a story with teeth, scheduled preliminary hearings on airline discrimination practices, with Dr. Whitfield invited to testify. Brittany Colson, for her part, was formally terminated 4 days after the flight landed. No severance, no reference, and a permanent flag in the FAA's National Employment Conduct database that closed the door on every aviation job in the country. Her supervisor, Walter Diggs, was terminated the same week once investigators confirmed he'd buried complaint after complaint rather than addressed them. 22 other employees under his supervision were placed under review. Brittany went home to Bellport, Ohio, a town of just under 4,000 people, where she'd grown up, married her high school boyfriend, and once been considered the most confident, ambitious girl in her graduating class. The videos had beaten her home. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street. Her husband, Todd, filed for divorce 2 months later, telling her flatly that he didn't recognize the woman in those recordings. "The person I married would never have said those words to another human being," he told her, and he meant it. For months, Brittany refused to see what everyone else saw so clearly. She blamed Amara. She blamed the passengers who filmed her. She blamed the airline for not protecting her. She applied to nearly 200 jobs and heard back from none of them. Her face too recognizable, her name too searchable. She took an overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town just to have some income, and more than once a customer recognized her and asked, not unkindly, whether she was that flight attendant from the video. Each time, something in her chest twisted tighter. It was nearly 8 months later, sitting alone in her childhood bedroom with a stack of unpaid bills and a stack of unanswered job applications, that something finally cracked open in her that had been sealed shut since the day she walked off that aircraft. She'd been telling herself a story for months, that she'd simply been unlucky, that one passenger with connections had ruined an ordinary bad day. But sitting there in the quiet, she made herself actually watch Nora Bennett's video all the way through for the first time since it happened. Not to defend herself, just to watch it. She heard her own voice say the words, "This bathroom isn't for passengers like you." She heard herself invent a policy out of thin air, watched herself smile while doing it, watched Dr. Whitfield's face. Not angry, just tired, just quietly enduring something. She clearly wasn't experiencing for the first time. And for the first time since the incident, Brittany let herself feel what she'd been refusing to feel. Not embarrassment at getting caught, but the simple, ugly truth that she had looked at another human being and decided before a single word passed between them that she mattered less. She wrote a letter that night, not to a lawyer, not to corporate, not to anyone who could help her career. She wrote it to Dr. Amara Whitfield, care of the FAA regional office, and in it, she didn't ask for forgiveness or a second chance. She simply admitted, in her own handwriting, exactly what she'd done and why it was wrong. That she'd let a small amount of authority curdle into cruelty. That she'd judged a woman by the color of her skin before she'd judged her by anything else, and that no policy, real or invented, could ever justify what she'd said. She asked only that the letter be added to whatever training program Dr. Whitfield was building, so that somewhere, some other new flight attendant might read it and recognize the warning signs in themselves before it was too late. Dr. Whitfield read that letter twice. She didn't reply right away, and when she finally did, it wasn't forgiveness exactly. Some things aren't hers to forgive on behalf of everyone who's ever stood in that same aisle. But she did include an anonymized version of it, with Brittany's permission, in the very first training module of the reform program she was about to build for the airline that had once employed her. That reform program grew larger than anyone at Meridian Skyways had imagined. Within a year, every one of the airline's 15,000 employees had completed a mandatory course in bias awareness and passenger dignity, built directly around the events of Flight 462. Real-time discrimination reporting lines were installed across the entire fleet, monitored around the clock. A new consent decree, negotiated with federal regulators, put Meridian under 5 years of independent oversight. The airline's stock dipped sharply in the weeks after the story broke, then climbed to record highs 18 months later. As passengers who'd once dreaded flying with dignity on the line began actively choosing the airline that had been forced, publicly and completely, to change. Dr. Amara Whitfield became something she never set out to be: the most sought-after voice in commercial aviation civil rights reform. Her consulting practice, built on nothing but hard-won credibility and lived experience, trained airlines across the country and eventually across 3 continents. She testified before Congress. She was invited to speak at international aviation safety conferences. She received letters, dozens of them every month, from travelers who told her that, because of the reforms bearing her name, they had flown for the first time without bracing themselves for humiliation. 18 months after that flight, standing at a lectern in Washington, D.C., about to be honored for her contribution to civil rights in transportation, a young flight attendant approached her nervously near the gate. "Dr. Whitfield," the young woman said, "I went through the training program built around what happened to you. I just wanted to say, it changed how I see every single person who walks onto my aircraft. Thank you for turning what happened to you into something that protects the rest of us." Amara smiled and thanked her, and as she walked toward her gate, she thought, not for the first time, about how strange it was that the worst hour of a routine business trip had become the doorway to the most meaningful work of her career. She hadn't set out to change an industry. She had only wanted to use the bathroom on a 2-hour flight and be treated like a human being while doing it. Sometimes, she'd come to understand, the most enormous change in the world starts with the smallest, most basic refusal to accept the unacceptable. And somewhere in Bellport, Ohio, a woman who had once blocked a stranger from an airplane bathroom, out of nothing but prejudice, sat quietly with her own letter. Finally understanding, finally owning, finally ashamed in a way that mattered. Not because a camera had caught her, but because she had finally caught herself. If this story moved you, sit with it for a second before you scroll away. Dignity was never supposed to be something you had to earn by looking a certain way, dressing a certain way, or proving yourself to a stranger with a clipboard. It belongs to everyone automatically, without exception. The next time you're tempted to make a snap judgment about someone based on how they look, remember Flight 462, and remember that the person you're underestimating might be the very reason the world eventually changes for the better.